Delighted to see everybody here. These are always wonderful sessions and looking forward very much to hearing from Elizabeth today. She is an author and has been a counselor, and she is going to be sharing with us what she has from her experiences in counseling and in working with people, both those who have passed and those who are with those who have passed. And so I'm very anxious to hear from her and looking forward to it. Elizabeth, it's up to you.
Great. Look, thank you very much. It's such a beautiful moment for me because I have been involved with this book that I've just had launch internationally for about 13 years. And it's not only 13 years of writing the book, it's actually 13 years of participating with those in the afterlife. And really, I know that the mums on this call and dads on this call and people watching everywhere who have been touched by suicide will understand. I had two young girls and more afterwards, but two young girls leave my life. One was a client of mine, Shiloh Griggs from California, a college student. And she took her life after the second session with me about 4 or 5 days later, a week later. And then the second one, Mia, is Australian, and she took her life. She was only 14. And so what I was awash in with both of them was enormous sense of guilt. And I think this is just enormous suffering for mums everywhere, because you rehearse all those moments. Thinking mind takes you into the crevices and the nooks and the crannies of everything that we could have done differently leading up to that moment. And it is astounding. So, and it's not useful, but what we're looking for is an answer that will bring us some comfort and peace. And actually, the thing that I think brings most people comfort and peace is realizing that life continues and that love never dies. And so, what happened was that I was living in America at the time. I was living in Southern Oregon, and when Shiloh ended her life, and within about 2 or 3 days, it was my birthday. So every year of my birthday on the 12th of January, I remember her ending her life a few days before. And I climbed into bed, and I was really grieving so fully and shocked, and this was the first person I'd ever known who'd taken their life. And I was in my room, and sunlight and moonlight was streaming in the window, and I looked over into the shadows, and there she was. And she said to me, I can see everything now. And I think this phrase really depicts what happens when we become conscious. And so many of our beautiful teens and loved ones who are suicidal, or who are in this state of mind that they perceive that they're not enough, or they perceive that that people will be better without them being here, which is the absolute opposite of what we all perceive. That they're not realizing and they're not comprehending that there is an afterlife. And I know, I've had so many people come back now and say that if they'd have known, and if they'd have had an awareness of what was happening at the time, they would never have taken their lives. I've never ever had one person from the afterlife say, I'm glad that I'm here. Not that it is the most exquisite place, and I've got a lot of detail of what it's like there. But I think that we need to really get a sense that our beautiful ones have left us, and they're now aware, and they're now conscious of the love that they have for all of you, that they love life. And Shiloh said to me, that she would never have taken the actions that she did. Would she have known about the preciousness of life? So The other person that was, and it's important to mention here, I had a wonderful colleague that I met at a conference. We were both speakers at a conference in America. And it's so lovely to have you all from those of you who are in America at the moment, because it's a place that's very precious to my heart. And I actually never wanted to come back to Australia. And I was over there, I think, I thought that I was leaving Australia to come to a place where a lot of beautiful things would open up for me with my career, and, you know, I would meet someone and so on. And then what happened is this incredible run of tragedy happened. And that's what I write about in my new book, There Are No Goodbyes. I never ever would have perceived that I would have had anything like this. But when John Mack and Professor John Mack was a Harvard psychiatrist, Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he and I spoke at a conference, and afterwards he actually ended up inviting my daughter and I to come to his home in Boston, in Cambridge, just near Harvard on Brattle Street, to use that as our base in America. And we ended up living there with John in this massive mansion of his, and meeting so many amazing people for most of 2003. And for those of you who know of John's work, he was incredibly known and loved throughout the world. One of the early books that he wrote was on suicide, teen suicide. And little did I know when I was with John that he was preparing to be in the afterlife and to communicate with me along with these two beautiful teens. And I lost all three of them within months of each other, and John and me are left within 2 weeks. So that the trauma and the tragedy was massive for me, and the getting over it has taken a long time to get over it, to get over the trauma, but to get through and live the transformation, and live to the point where I can be here and talk to you all and give you detail and answer your questions. One of the things that John has done from the afterlife is speak about the need for us all to awaken to the lived experience of the afterlife, that he said it's too abstract, that we need to better understand, not from a religious lens, but from a very pragmatic lens and a spiritual lens that says it's really true, there really is an afterlife. And what is that? And it's certainly not a punitive place. It doesn't, you know, there are not, I haven't come across anybody talking about the wrath of God or anything, you know, when they get there. It is the most exquisite, loving place. And in fact, the more detail that I hear about the afterlife, the more convinced I am that the translation is for us to grow into a way of communicating with each other, a way of living, a way of understanding life that they have there. That is more than anything I know now, that is why they want us to focus on the afterlife, to change the way that we live here, because it is a deeply compassionate, non-judgmental, non-threatening, exquisite place, complex place, and multi-dimensional, and their life really is of service. I would love to open up to some questions, because I know that so many of you are sitting listening to me with questions, and I'm happy to talk about all manner of things.
Yeah, what we want to do is we want to help you to do exactly what you have described. People need to understand the afterlife. They need to understand that the transition that we call death is just a temporary part of a person's life, and that they move into the next realm of life. And we're trying to help people to understand that. And we're trying to do it by having them have afterlife communications. And so the afterlife communications are very important. And once they have the afterlife communication, then they will want to know more about it. And so then that's when we can teach them about it. So our endeavor is very much in line with what you're describing, and we all just have to pull together and do what you're doing, which is to write about it and speak about it. And so we are very supportive of what you're doing and your efforts to help people to understand that we are eternal beings having a physical experience, and that we are brothers and sisters together. More than that, we're one mind together, and that we should be living together in peace, love, and joy. So we're very supportive of what you're doing.
That's just absolutely marvelous, and it is so meaningful to me to hear you say that you're supportive, because I think and a lot of our parents who have been touched by suicide, and actually if we widen that to death, that when we lose a loved one, no matter what way they pass, I think that the natural thing is wanting to understand. The natural question that comes to mind in our hearts is, well, what now? You know, where are they? And what does that mean? And can they hear me? And, you know, I say to people over and again, talk to them, they're listening. And so I don't think a lot of people understand that they're listening. And I just want to talk a little bit about that, because it's such a simple thing, but it's such an amazing, and I can feel people around me and people behind me in spirit. There's a couple of different ways that I understand communication happens. Sometimes they show up, and so I do consults all over the world, and I'm intrinsically a therapist and a change agent, and I'm able to, the dreamscape opens up, and I'm able to see and sense and know in what I call the dreamscape. And people show up in the dreamscape, and I've had the most extraordinary experiences of contact with those in the afterlife, and I'd love to share those with you depending on the time, or some of those through questions. But sometimes they literally are there with us. And when anybody comes around me, and what you all might feel is you might have a momentary thought of that person. And that's one of the things that I notice first off, that often you have a momentary thought. And I call that on the field, because they communicate on the field. So we are divine instruments. And as divine instruments, the number one thing that we can do to actually open up to communicating better is really come out of our heads and our minds and refocus our thinking mind, which for most people these days is a really hard task. And to come into our hearts and really register what's going on in the body, to decommission any influences that would take us out of this moment in time. So mindfulness work, mindful awareness, being able to really be present with what is. And that amplifies our body as an instrument and our heart's registry, and the knowing, our connection with the knowing field. And so often we get this sense of a thought about someone, and that's what often it is for me. And sometimes the person's right there, I turn around and they're right there. Other times it's a feeling, and maybe they're not so good at communicating, and it's a feeling that they're there, and I encourage them. And often, just a couple of days ago, I actually worked with a woman from Vashon Island off Seattle, off the coast of Seattle and Washington State. And anyway, her husband had died a year ago, passed over, and I just sort of turned to him and I said, "This is how you need to help me hear you." And so if you're wanting to communicate with a loved one, it's as simple as that. Sometimes they're still at a distance, so they haven't used their focus and their intention to travel through time space to where we are. And in that way, often what happens is that because I go up into the knowing field, and then I'm receiving the information, and sometimes I can see the afterlife. A lot of the time I've been taken into the afterlife, my consciousness. So I have this very weird and wonderful ability to be able for my consciousness to travel into the other side and other dimensions. So whether it's past life or whether it's this life. So it's extraordinary, and that's how I wrote some of my book. I was able to be taken through time space, And, you know, for Shiloh, once she took me to the moment of her car wreck. She had a massive car wreck. And I was taken through that as a witness to what happened, and for her moving out of her body while she was in the ambulance being taken to the airport to be airlifted to Medford Airport. And that was extraordinary, Wendy. I don't know whether your antenna pricked up when I was writing about that, about how time-space opened up for me, and then we were somewhere else and they were working on her. She had a frontal head injury, and she was at death's door. And that's fascinating. I think that part is one of my most favorite, most fascinating parts, the way that they took her and I in a momentary glitch in time to another place and worked on her. And I looked across this room, and there were doctors and there were light beings there, and they were working on her. And I looked and there was no injury. And I asked, well, why is there no injury? And every time I'd ask a question, the answer would come. And this is something that we don't understand. We have a Google right around us. You know, we can ask anything, and it's always comes back. And so all we have to do is realize that we have these incredible multisensory abilities, and then we're tapped in. And certainly I'm tapped into most things all the time.
Well, I'd like to say that I just got a chance today to see a short video that she did about the suicide of a young man. And it really impacted me tremendously. It was very affirming, because my son died in 2004, but I didn't come to any understanding of the afterlife until about 2 years ago. So I went through a very long dry spell. And since that time, I've had a number of really wonderful readings. I've done Dr. Hogan's work. Hi, Craig. I have had 2 transformational readings with Suzanne Giesman. And Suzanne has affirmed to me that my son Alex did go into a hospital-like setting. When he did come through very strongly for me, he did have great regret. He really wanted forgiveness. He felt it was an impulsive, sort of impetuous move, and if he had known then what he knows now, he would not have done it. But it was an incredibly healing reading for me. She's an evidential medium also, so tons of evidence, which was wonderful. And then a year later, I had another reading with her, which was more about where he is and what he's doing now. And that was fantastic, because he talked about how I'm listening to the binaural beats and about communicating to him through my meditation. And he also affirmed, I do speak to him, and he also affirmed that it is his voice that I am hearing. So I'll ask him questions, and I've tried very hard to discern him. And he affirmed to me in that reading that was in fact his voice that I was hearing. So that's really wonderful. I feel the more I'm meditating, the more I'm listening to the tones, the more I'm getting more connected and more intuitive in that fashion. But it's been a fabulous experience, all in general. I mean, it's sad to lose a son, but I've been completely transformed as a person. So in terms of spiritual growth, I've soared and taken off. So anyway.
That's wonderful. That's just wonderful. And can I say that he often brings friends who are there as you become the receiver. He's standing there, and he has one friend who's this side of him that's quite close, and then another one standing behind him. And so, you know, when the girls were communicating with me, they'd often bring in other teens who had taken their life. And they're, you know, it's just absolutely marvelous that you have come through this period of time, and that you're awakening and opening, and how has that transformed your life, your everyday life, you know?
It's been unbelievable. And speaking of the friends, I work with women that have lost children to suicide. And in fact, in a recent reading I had, he did bring through several of the children, the sons, of
Yes.
those women. Are you saying they're
Yes.
standing around me now? Are they?
Yes,
Is
I
that what
can
you're
see
saying?
them. I can see
Yeah.
them in your dreamscape, and it's sort of interesting. This is what they're showing me, and this is fascinating. I can see him leaning forward, and it's like this time-space pocket, this tunnel, if you like, or a lens of availability. I've never had this before. This is the first time they're downloading this to me.
Oh, wow.
I love it. You know, it was 7 a.m. this morning in Australia, and I'm not a morning person. And actually, I had such burnout writing the book that I had adrenal fatigue and so forth. So in the morning, I got up at 5:50, and I kept saying to them, "You've got to help me because my brain has got to be in gear this morning." But this is what they're showing me. When we have intention, when we have willingness and openness and presence, and we intend to communicate, time space, there is an opening in time space between you as the receiver and the other person or the others. And so what I see is really just, and I talk about this in my book, in that part that I referenced to Wendy, that because time space has a consciousness, then that portal, or that, we don't really have words for it, that it becomes available like a lens, like a camera lens. And that's what they're all sort of looking through, that lens, and looking at you that way. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Yes, yeah. And so, sort of like through a periscope or something like that.
Yeah, like that. They're looking like that. And let me just sort of tune into him a little bit more. He's really, he knows, and he's very patient, and he's very cool, isn't he? So
yeah, he is.
He's very cool. And some of the work that he does is actually, he's a very good support for others, especially in times of trauma. You know, a lot of them choose to come in to other kids that have come over who've been really traumatized. And he has a very grounded kind of sense of being. And he could go into those moments and really hold space for those young people, and to kind of just be a presence with them and for them. And he's learning a great deal. Gosh, there are a lot of children over there. I can see them in the dreamscape. So we welcome them in this moment, and we love you all, and we're doing our best. I know it's slow and the change is slow, but gosh, you know. So anyway, bringing it back here is that he knows that you will be changing and growing through this time, and that you're completing things that will allow you to have a receiver that is more confident and knowing that that's what you're hearing. I think sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Is that me? Is that someone else?
Exactly. Yeah. So you're saying he's patient with my attunement.
He is patient with he is with your becoming. That's what it is, with your becoming. You've also got angels around you, and a lot of need to know that you're enough. That you're, you know, that it's all about self-love, and to really sit in that place of self-love as a conduit for love, and that will assist you greatly. The more you sit in that place of self-love, that it wasn't your fault, that this is meant to be, and that your wisdom and truth will I'm seeing bells ringing, so it's really a metaphor for ahas. You're getting many ahas, aren't you?
Yes.
It's really joining the dots all the time.
Yes.
That's just absolutely marvelous. Whereabouts do you live in the States?
I live in McLean, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
well,
Thank you for all of that. That's just beautiful. Thank you so much for all of that.
But he's very, you know, one of the things, they're never alone. And he's not alone. And he's showing me, he wants you to, well, they want us to know that there's food there. Has he ever told you that?
No, I've never heard that. No.
Yeah, they eat, and they remember through eating, so that they don't have a body, but they remember their eating, and that's what they call eating. So Shiloh and Mia, the two girls who I write about in the book, towards the end of the book when Mia takes her life, they talk about that and about the food they eat. And Mia came in one day and I set her up a plate at the table and I looked over and she was munching. She was munching and chewing. And so it was the memory. So the intention and the willingness and the presence and focus allows them to manifest. And this is, you know, part of my work. How do we manifest? And that's what it is, the power of intention. And it's really intention of the heart. It's really not an intention of the mind. So that's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for all that.
I was just wanting to pick up on something, Elizabeth, that you just said to Susie, because I lost my son Kyle, who was just 16, 19 months ago. And one of my issues is about soul plans and suicide. And you just said to Susie, oh, it was meant to be. So I just wondered what your take was on whether Kyle and I could have had this agreement and that his suicide was predestined, because I've got real issues about that. Like, why would he choose me as his mother when I was going to be so bad at it and let him become so depressed that he was going to suicide? It's like, why would we have that plan for that to happen?
What I'm hearing is, you know, why would he have chosen me as such a bad mother? And actually that's what I call the small story of self, because the truth, the only truth is that when we all do the best we can, and that this is the challenge is for you to come to understand yourself as the greatness that you are. And when we are the lived experience of greatness, there are no thoughts that we're not enough. And you know, there's a time when we plan what's happening, and there's a time and there are people who are really great spiritual mentors who are with us planning our life. And it's not, what we do is we don't talk like that there. We don't say, well, I'm such a bad person, I'll be hopeless at that. You know, that's not what we say. And that is the thinking of pain and trauma and early trauma and early familial trauma. So family dynamics that would have us grow into people that we perceive that we are, who are limited and restricted by those perceptions, right? So the truth is that you did the best that you can. And the other truth is that when you lift up out of that thinking, you'll come to realize that it's not the experience so much as the getting through the experience and the transformation through the experience that we're looking for. So we're going to say it like this to you. It's not necessarily deemed that absolutely on that day that he would have taken his life. So there are many influences around people, and certainly we're not going to say to you that on this day that person will take their life. There is willingness, there are certain circumstances that come together, but certainly part of his depression or this depressed state was because of that intergenerational trauma. And that the fact that he took his life wasn't because you were a bad mum, and you're not a bad mum. So this is something that I'm encouraging you to lift up out of, because the I'm a bad mum will keep you hemmed in. It won't allow, it's a small story. It's not true in anywhere in time space. If you and I went in this moment, we would not find that to be a truth anywhere. If we turned every stone in every planet, there is no truth to that. That is your perception. When you see your magnificence and you let your heart receive the magnificence that you are and your son is, you'll become radiant. You'll hear more. You'll lift up out of that. I understand why you're feeling that way, but it is not true. What I'm seeing is a car door, and that gave him an opportunity to return home. And it also gives you an opportunity to grow. I think one of the most painful things is suicide, but without a doubt. It is truly one of the most dreadful circumstances to have to live through and to transform through. But I'll give you an example. I had a woman, a mother, come to me recently for a consultation by phone. And I do all my work by phone, almost all my work. And she had lost her daughter's husband. So her daughter was about 23, I think. And she had only 4 months earlier married this beautiful young man who was just finishing up a degree in social work at Sydney University. And he was well loved, and he was just such a beautiful man. He loved bike riding. He was on the road, riding down the road one day too fast, didn't realize that the cars in front of him had stopped. He went straight into the car head first, was wearing a helmet. Just happened to be that the car in front was a medical student from university, and it just happened to be on the sidewalk, just happened to be that a doctor was right on the sidewalk. Now, how is that? How does that happen? That you run into a doctor and so what happened was that they kept him alive until the ambulance arrived, and then until they got to hospital, until his wife could come and other family members, and then he passed. So it was only 4 months after the wedding. You know, they were setting up their life. He was a week away from graduating university, and there he is. And do you know what he said to me? This is just remarkable. He said, "It was an opportunity I had to take."
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Marion.
Hi. I lost my son about 2 years ago. My son also, like myself, sat in my physical circle since he was 13 up to the age of 16 and a half. And all his life, he has been extremely close to the other side of life and knew all about physical mediumship, knew what was waiting for him on the other side because of his communication with his grandparents. And yet he took his life. And
Wow.
As a medium myself, and been physical in for the last 47 years, I actually got extremely angry. I got really, really angry. I got angry that he ended his life the way he did, the way we found him, and also that he knew so much about the other side and also what happens because he had more than one friend who took their life. So he knew the agony that the parents obviously went through.
Yes.
It took about a month and a half before I was ready for him to actually communicate. And he happened to do that during the night more than during the daytime, where he explained exactly what had happened and why he did it. And what would be in his last letter, which was completely correct when we finally got it. Also very interesting is because if I do a lot of work for Spirit, I do travel an awful lot. And on my platform work, he's now there bringing, I don't know how many suicides through. And I just can't get them all in. I've often said to him, Jerome, stop it. I can't take 10 different suicides in one night to people. This is not fair because, of course, there's lots of people who come to this, to my demonstration. Funnily enough, just before I went on here today, he threw a ball. We have certain balls with bells in it in our circles. And he just threw one at me and the cat to remind me to come on today because I read it, that it was about suicide. So even being, what I'm trying to say to everybody here today, being a medium, have sat and worked all my life, suicide is still extremely hard. And I was very surprised how I was so angry. And I have to be very honest, I'm still angry now. I mean, I communicate with him, but if I could get a broom and hit him, I would, I have to say, for what
and that's so normal. It's so normal. and it's so painful. And really, your anger really is an expression of your love and the experience of him, and you love him so deeply. And how dare you take yourself away from my heart, and that I can laugh with you and be with you and have this lived experience of you. And he had such a good sense of humor, and amazing being, that he was so awake and aware, and slipped harlequin-like to the other side. And you know, so your anger is really understandable, and my sense is that his place is there only because we have such a massive problem on that. We have many massive problems on this planet, but one of them is suicide. And I know that you know, most of the young people who take their lives don't have any concept of death. Yours did, and your son you know, better understood. But even then, he had to go over the other side. And are you understanding why? Was he able to express?
Oh yes, he has expressed that.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't take the anger away for doing it. I have to say that still has to sort of filter into my mind, even as a medium, and his mother for some time, or the whole family.
And I just want to speak to the anger for a moment. What I often say to people I work with is that it's like a corridor of experience, and we stay in the angry room because it gives us an expression of power often, and that it lifts us out of the final room, which is the vulnerability and the sadness room. And so often, and then it's out to the garden. And so part of it, you know, what I would encourage you to do, for example, is have moments where you lift, you know, would I be willing to take this anger, just allow it to rise up from me, and to put it in that box over there, or put it in that basket over there, just for now. And what does it feel like in my body now that I can just let go and have that spaciousness? And what comes into the spaciousness as my anger is just sitting there for a moment? You know, what comes in? And I feel that there's once you get past the anger, and I think that it's absolutely understandable. It's so understandable. When I had received the call that Shiloh had found her mother's gun and killed herself at point blank range, I was so horrified, and I was so angry because I see and sense and know, and I was right there, and I would have done anything to support her. And I was really angry, and asked her, you better come and tell me what the hell this is all about, you know. And so that's a natural reaction, but it's very difficult, and it's very difficult for you. But you've got so many people around you. You've got such a big task, haven't you? Big role. And he's there shepherding, because you love him so much and he loves you. That makes a really good bridge. And so he's lining them up on the other side, because I actually think this is a massive epidemic that we've got going on of young people taking life. But the other thing is that Shiloh came through a year ago and said to her mother and I, over about 18 months ago, and I didn't know it was her birthday, and she came in and I got hold of Jeannie in California. Anyway, and she said that people aren't waking up on this planet, and there are going to be many weather events coming up, and that's the way she put it. And this was in the beginning of, like, before all those massive weather events that we saw across America and in other places through the Bahamas and so forth. So I think that we're going to see this ongoing nature of we're without connection, even though we're all connected through Zoom. We really don't have true connection much anymore, and we have a lot of young people thinking that connection is through the screen, and they don't get the feeling of love and true beautiful warmth of another body in the room. So I do believe you're going to be a very busy mum, and I'm really sorry to hear about your loss. And I know that and the others who I spoke with, it it is something that we really, it takes years. It's taken me 13 years, and I lost 2 others in the course of writing my book that were equally as extraordinary. So I think that's clearly your role, to be able to work with him. What's happened to the anger right now? What do you know?
I'm listening to you, and I thought, well, I must try to put the anger that way and see what I can do.
I feel it softening already, though. Yeah. Do you?
Yes, I do, but I will find a broom and hit him.
We only have a few minutes left. I'd like to think about what we can do to help parents who have lost children.
Yes, I think, you know, one of the things, I did a lot of ballet when I was growing up, and what it did is brought my focus, and that was in the leading dance school in Canberra, and it was up to 18, 20 hours a week, like the waist gymnastics program. So what that did is really brought me to know my body and be aware of the body. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of their body. We're not aware of what we're feeling at any given moment. And often we're wired to get away from our feelings, and we've got a plethora of addictions, and we've got lots of food we can take in, and we're not as aware of what our body's doing. So being in the present moment, being able to be with nature is a really biggie. And often when we're doing simple things, that's when they come through, because our busyness precludes them from being able to actually get in. I remember John Mack came through one day, and he said, it's really crazy trying to get to speak to you, because I was so busy. And you know, we're not just reflecting and receiving. So walks in nature, time in nature, being able to be available, being aware, meditating is really important. Also being, you know, going up to a tree and feeling the bark on the tree, or feeling the roughness of a stone. These type of things bring us into the moment and develop our, what I call witness posture, so that we're witnessing and being the witness on the edge, on the bleachers, rather than being down on the playing field, coming up onto the bleachers and being aware of what's arising, but also what's going on around you. And so those are the kind of the critical things to me. Deconstructing any sadness or any sort of claims that you're not enough, or programming from the childhood. That's a really biggie if we can do that, because they're the things that actually bring us out of this spaciousness and this divinity, this connectedness. So doing that inner work and that personal growth work is essential. Being able to, Marion, your son's going like this behind you. Oh, sorry, I just got distracted. And just being aware, being open, feeling the air on your face, feeling what it feels like to have a feather on your skin. So these are the things that will make us better receivers. And there is just so much joy in the afterlife, and those who are around you all, and for this moment. And how beautiful is it that you all come together regularly and speak about this topic. It's very special. And I just want to say thank you for having me along. It's just such a lovely opportunity to meet you all and hear your stories and be available.
And
there are no goodbyes.
Can you tell us a little bit about if people want to contact you, how do they do that? And what are you up to? What are you doing in terms of work, in terms of presentations, and everything else?
I've actually got a workshop that I'm doing in Sydney at the Kirribilli Club coming up. That's on the 12th of May. And but the book is available everywhere on Amazon, all around the world. It was actually published by Hay House, and they're a very significant publisher of this kind of book. And it's available online everywhere. It's not available in other languages yet. it came out and was simultaneously launched, which is really rare in Australia. So I'm one of 4 authors who's been simultaneously launched by this company. And that was simultaneously launched in America, in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand in September last year. So it's only just on the market. But I'd love some feedback. You can get hold of me at my website, elizabethrobinson.com.au or wingsofwisdom.com.au. And I have a Facebook author page, and I'd love anybody who's listening to come on that. And you can find that through my website, and there are links to my Facebook page. I often do videos and people are loving the videos that I'm doing.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. That was very enlightening, and you had many things to say that I think that people wanted to hear, needed to hear. And I think that we would like to have you do some more of it. We'd like to have you engaged, because the message that you're bringing, the insights that you have, the unique perspectives that you have based upon your background, we just have to bring to people. And so we're going to find other ways of getting your word out to other people in AREI and in the greater world that we're trying to get out.